Hi, folks. If you're expecting to watch the NJBIZ panel discussion on discrimination in the workplace, you made it. We'll be starting in just a few minutes. I'm just giving everyone a chance to get settled in virtually here. It won't take long. Yeah, just another few seconds. We'll be ready to go. Okay, I think we can get started now. Hello, thanks for joining us. I'm Jeff Kanige, I'm the editor of NJBIZ, and we've got an important and timely discussion for you planned today on discrimination in the workplace. We're going to get started in just a few minutes, but before we do, there are a few things that you should know. First, we're going to leave time for questions. If you want to ask a question, just click the Q&A button in your Zoom control bar, enter your question, and we'll get to as many as we can. Now, it's best not to answer anonymously, because that way, if we don't get to your question and you really want an answer, we can try and get it to you via email. One last thing before we get started, today's discussion is being recorded. You'll get a link to the recording via email a day or so after the event, so please be on the lookout for that. All right, it is my great pleasure now to ask our panelists to join us, and I'll have them introduce themselves as soon as they appear. There we go. Okay, welcome, folks. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves and tell us a bit about yourself. David, why don't we start with you?
Okay, thanks, Jeffrey. So my name is David Nachman. I'm a immigration lawyer and mostly focused on the business area of practice, and sort of born and bred in the labor and employment area, where I used to work for some larger labor and employment firms in the state of New Jersey. And we have offices in Ridgewood, New Jersey, also an office in Raritan, and affiliated offices up in Canada and a couple in India. And we represent mostly HR managers for corporations of all sizes throughout the United States and throughout the world with regard to doing visas, which is sort of the run-of-the-mill type stuff that we do. But we also assist with regard to employment eligibility verification and I-9 practice, including investigations and training.
Great, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Jeff.
Jennifer?
Hi, my name is Jennifer O'Connor, and I am an attorney and partner at Sabre LLC in Florham Park, where I advise organizations and management on workplace issues. We conduct training, we draft policies, we draft handbooks, we conduct internal investigations, and when litigation does happen, we represent companies and individuals or individuals in those lawsuits as well.
Okay, and thank you. Judy?
Hi, I'm Judy Saylor. I'm from Prime Point. I'm an HR specialist, and what I do is support our clients with all of their HR needs when it comes to hiring, onboarding, leave of absence. And I am also a professor at Rider University. And so I'm very interested, as always, in teaching young people about what is coming and what they need to be prepared for in the workplace.
Welcome, thank you. Michael?
Hey everyone, I'm Michael Timmis. I'm an HR consultant with Insperity. We are based out of Florham Park, New Jersey. Also have an office in Woodbridge. Our home office is in Kingwood, Texas, and we're across the country. In my role, I do a lot of work with our clients, helping them to get the most out of their human talent, give it a competitive advantage in their workplace. And I also spend a lot of time dealing with employee relations issues and do some discrimination, harassment prevention training as well.
Okay, excellent. Thank you all. Welcome thank you for joining us, and welcome. I'd like to get started, if we could, talking a little bit about what's going on in the world, what the background for the rest of the discussion will be. And first of all, from the point of view of the renewed or intensified focus on social justice. I can remember talking to business owners and CEOs last summer while the George Floyd protests were going on, and there was a feeling that A, everyone was talking about it, and B, this seemed different than some of other moments in the past. I wonder if in your practices in your day-to-day work are hearing the same thing or experiencing the same thing, and if so, what does that mean for your clients? Jennifer?
Thanks, Jeff. Absolutely. The social justice movement and what we've seen since George Floyd has really, really impacted the workplace, especially over the past year. So it's not over. And, I remember the commercials, this is not your father's Oldsmobile, this is not your father's workplace. So what used to cut it isn't going to cut it anymore. Generic mission statements and kind of platitudes about we are strongly opposed to XYZ conduct, that's not enough. As the workplace really shifts to younger employees and you've got more millennials and Gen Z working, they are committed to making a change and seeing changes through. So if you have a mission statement and you're saying we're committed to diversity and equity and inclusion, then be ready to explain what your commitment entails. What are you doing? What actions are you taking? We've seen with larger corporations, Coca-Cola, Apple, Google, there's been a backlash from the public regarding donations to certain candidates and perceived support or lack thereof of certain movements such as Black Lives Matter. So it's going to depend, obviously, on the specific company and the size, location, workforce, but generally speaking, employees really expect a commitment in the workplace to diversity. And what's interesting is recently in May, there was a poll conducted by a DEI firm called Paradigm. And of 2,000 Americans surveyed, 68% said that they want to talk about racial injustice at work. And the respondents between the ages of 35 and 44, 78% of them responded that they want to talk about this at work.
Okay.
What used to be taboo is now no longer.
Okay. And we're going to get into how you can have those discussions. But you mentioned the next generation of employees, workers, the workforce coming in, and how the expectations are different. And you also mentioned the public backlash. What you need to do, it seems to me, and from one of my discussions, what folks are worried about is how do they deal with a potential backlash internally, inside, and how do you recruit? You make sure that you're able to recruit those kinds of in-demand workers who have lots of choices and are really discerning about where they're going to go. Judy and Michael, do you have any thoughts on that end of it?
Well, I do have a couple.
Okay.
One of the major,
I figured you would.
One of the major things that we're talking about, though, is millennials are 26 to 40 years old now.
Mm-hmm.
Many, they're young families. They've gained a lot of experience in the workplace, and that generation really had a different growing up phase than the previous generation. The next generation, which we're talking about 5 generations in the workplace. They're 6 years old to 24. And those 24-year-olds are computer programmers, cybersecurity. They're working in full-time, educated level jobs.
Right.
And their expectation is much different. We talk about them on the collegiate level where they bounce jobs. They are not attached to their father's job any longer. In the past, you retired from where you started working. And that's not what their mindset is. They lived through and saw the 2009 recession and their parents potentially losing a position. So they're much more entrepreneurial. They're much more, driven to get to that next big step for themselves because they learn from their parents not to miss an opportunity, to always take that step and just give it a try.
Okay. Michael, anything to add?
Yeah, I think when we look at it, individuals who are applying for positions, they're taking a good look at the backgrounds of organizations and what they're doing in the community and what have you, and seeing how they're connected on a personal level with what's going on the organizational level too. So I think organizations have to look at that and take into consideration that if they are growing, they're looking to bring in people across all generations, but specifically the millennials and the Gen Z. How are you being able to connect with those individuals? I think it's also too, you talk about recruiting, it's important to go out and look what's going on your social media pages, whether it's Glassdoor or what have you, and what's being written out there and what people are saying about their experiences. That sort of stuff should be monitored on a regular basis and should be used as information that helps pivot and augment when need be, and what things the organization may have to look closer at developing. And I think it's also the vulnerability of being able to say, hey, we recognize there's opportunity for us to change, and this is what we're looking to do and what we have done.
Okay. And Jennifer, I think you mentioned that, it's not going to stop. And I think we've seen that as new developments occur, particularly most recently, perhaps, with some truly terrible acts against Asian immigrants. David, is there any way for employers, business owners, executives to sort of keep up, to get ahead of that kind of thing? Is what Michael mentioned, keep an eye on your social media pages. Is there anything else that you should be doing to sort of make sure that you know what's going on out there and can stay ahead of it?
Well, I think that educating, yourself and educating the organization, which is a form of training, getting them to understand the importance of diversity and inclusion is critical. And just jumping off from what Jennifer said, I think that more and more organizations that we're finding are actually putting people in positions of diversity directors and diversity and inclusion directors. And these are folks whose responsibility it is to put together training programs in-house and to offer those training programs to the staff. And it has to be on a regular basis. It can't be a one-shot deal, right. Because that's where this whole concept of diversity and inclusion is sort of falling down. It's coming into vogue. Obviously, the idea is to carry it, not just to ride the wave and then it's over, but you have to continue it. So it's about promulgating this concept throughout the organization, and understanding that it's also, it can rear its ugly head anywhere from the very beginning, the onset of hiring, bringing an employee on, which is where we get involved with employers, is in the employment verification process. And you have to help them to understand that they can't look at an individual and start making determinations based upon the way that individual looks, because that's the way you get yourself into trouble. That's discrimination.
Sure. Jennifer, you were nodding. Did you want to add anything to that?
I agree with what David said, and you have to do more now as an organization than just kind of check the diversity box, where you're saying, yeah, we did a training and now we're finished and it's back to business as usual, because that's just not going to be enough. And the workforce and social media, everyone really is looking for this commitment to change. And I think it's okay for organizations to say, as Michael pointed out, there's some work to be done. And as long as you're open to doing the work, these are new conversations. So no one's got the playbook down yet. It's really just a willingness to be open to it. I think that's what's so important.
Okay, well, we're going to try to at least start writing that playbook here today. The next thing, obviously the other big dynamic out there is the pandemic, and that's creating a whole new set of problems. Bruce Springsteen, who we all know, maybe not personally, but we know who he is, we just went back to Broadway. Outside the theater were a couple of dozen protesters complaining that the theater was not letting unvaccinated people in, and they were claiming that's discrimination. What are we seeing, Judy, in organizations now on how employers are handling that issue, vaccinated versus unvaccinated, and how can you differentiate that? Can you in some way ensure that your workplace is safe and yet not make people feel excluded?
Some of this really does start at the EEOC level. They have given their blessing for many employers to mandate a required vaccination.
Mhm.
And, it is obviously subject to certain issues, if you have a medical concern or even a religious issue, not to have to get that vaccination. But if your company has not made a decision, and Jennifer, correct me if I'm wrong, and put in your policy that, it's voluntary or it's not voluntary, you've now opened it up to basically 3 different groups that are now going to be in your office. You're going to have fully vaccinated, you're going to have I'm not vaccinated, and then you're going to have, potentially those who cannot be vaccinated because of a medical issue, of a sort. And I have seen everything from folks changing their facility to meet the needs of their employees. Everything from the big plastic shields, just like they did in some of the schools, to, a hybrid schedule. You'll work 2 days home, and then your counterparts will work the other 2 days, and there'll be a shift there. What are you doing with common areas? Lots of common areas right now, and several of the organizations that I support are empty. They don't want anybody in them. Everyone's still trying to figure out, how do we manage this? And, Bruce Springsteen and the concerts, I think there was another one with the Foo Fighters. There's been these decisions that folks are globally or regionally having a conversation to, and we're all forgetting, come September, all of the kids will go back to school, and
Right.
everybody down to 12-year-olds can be vaccinated.
Mhm.
So we're about to introduce a new level of discrimination in the high schools and the middle schools, not intentionally. So how are we going to work with that? And it starts absolutely at the top. I think all of us can agree, if your leadership is not making some decisive decisions and supporting their team, you're going to flounder, and you're going to see major issues coming forward from that.
Okay. Well, Jennifer, your name was invoked. So how should employers, business owners be thinking about that right now? I mean, what are the issues that they need to work through to make sure that they get it right?
There's a lot of issues. And as Judy mentioned, the guidance, right, from the EEOC, you've got guidance from the governor, and it doesn't always match guidance from the CDC. So I know with Governor Murphy, there's been executive orders issuing pretty regularly, and going through them and trying to figure out how to stay within the parameters set forth and keep a healthy, productive workplace for everyone in real time is very difficult.
Mhm.
So some clients that I've worked with have decided not to mandate vaccinations, but have lifted mask requirements and other requirements for vaccinated employees. So we're drafting these policies saying, if you are vaccinated, you must show proof of vaccination. Now, the danger here is you only want proof of vaccination. You don't want an email or a call from someone saying, I'm not vaccinated because I have XYZ disability. Didn't ask that. And now you can't unknow it.
Right.
So when something comes up with this employee in the future, if it does, they now have this opportunity to say, everything changed once I disclosed that I'm this religion or I have this disability, and there's your discrimination suit.
Okay.
So it's difficult.
All right. Michael and David, you were both seem to be agreeing. Anything to add on that point? Vaccination versus non-vaccination.
Yeah, I would say that a number of the clients that I'm serving have decided not to mandate it. They are allowing people to make the choice, and then they're just putting together guidelines for if they are in the office, safe distancing when they're in groups of a couple people or more. I have seen a number of clients that have folks who are in New York, who have, even in New Jersey, who have decided that they're going to take a pause until after Labor Day and then consider coming back, and so kind of use the summer to watch the variance and the numbers and see how they play itself out.
Okay.
And we're just watching very carefully. I mean, we have an internal policy. We're a pod sort of unto ourselves. So it's a very close group in our office. So we sort of know exactly what's going on with everyone in the office. We have not opened up to in-person meetings just yet. So we're still doing everything by Zoom, which is working just fine. So that's fine. And then we're watching very carefully what our clients are doing and using those as sort of litmus tests as we go. So just like Michael pointed out, I think that, it's just a matter of take it step by step, by the inch, life's a cinch, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Judy, when you said you had heard people change the way their offices look, I thought you were going to actually say that they had set up spaces for non-vaccinated and vaccinated people, which they actually did at the baseball stadiums in New York, where they segregated. I'm assuming that that's not real, right?
It is real.
Okay.
And, Jennifer's of course shaking her head because
Yes.
that's a discrimination suit.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as you start to divide folks by any type of category, you are setting yourself up with NJLAD or ADA to have that discrimination suit walked right up to your front door. And it doesn't take someone to be harmed, shall I say.
Mm-hmm.
Occasionally it's a feeling. I've been wounded by someone I trusted because I gave them information I should not have and didn't realize it at the time. We know that in lots of organizations, plexiglass shield became the catchphrase, and it's around people's desks because someone can walk into their space. So now they're protected with that. Some folks had the ability to space people out further and not put shields up, for example. But you have to be very mindful and go to legal counsel and ask those what you may think is a dumb question, which is not, because being in a lawsuit is much harder than asking a
Right.
dumb question at any given day.
Certainly. And Jennifer, on that point, it's maybe not even just physical separation, but just a feeling that I'm being excluded from meetings and decision making and things like that. Is that something they have to think about?
Yeah, because you're necessarily sort of ostracizing people, even unintentionally, right? And let's say that you've lifted the mask mandate and social distancing guidelines for vaccinated employees, as you legally can do. But ex-employees not vaccinated, and they told you this, so they're continuing to mask, but then they tell you or say in a lawsuit that they were ostracized by other employees, not included in meetings, and they felt that they had to disclose their disability to the entire organization because people kept saying, why don't you just get the vaccine? Then you wouldn't have to do all of this. So that's a form of discrimination in their eyes, right? So it's going to be sort of something that we figure out as we go along, because being vaccinated or unvaccinated on its own is not a protected class. However, the underlying reasons that you may not get vaccinated are protected categories.
Okay. All right. Well, that brings us to the whole question of the ADA. We've been sort of talking around a little bit, but what is the main issue there? Is it just that if you're requiring vaccinations, you can't ask, or you shouldn't in any way know what the underlying reason is?
Well, it's not that, but you have to be ready that if you do know and you're requiring vaccinations and somebody comes to you and says because of a religious reason or a disability, they're unable to get vaccinated, you have to accommodate those employees.
Right.
So what's the accommodation going to look like? Now, it can be that they're separated, like we were just talking about, and masking, which is going to lead to its own issues. But it may also be that they're asking to work remotely. And is that something that they can do based on the needs of their position? That's something that you have to figure out. A sort of reverse discrimination issue here is OSHA and the general duty clause and the obligation to provide a safe workplace. So you don't want to get reported to OSHA and have your vaccinated employees saying that you're not doing enough because there's unvaccinated employees here and they're potentially making the workplace unsafe.
Okay.
So.
Now, that also brings up another sort of cleavage that's developed, and that is A, between people who can work remotely and cannot, and B, hourly versus salaried employees, and how you treat them differently. Judy and Michael, how do you work through, first of all, the remote, non-remote? If someone is really uncomfortable coming to the office, but your judgment is they can't really do their job from home, what do you do, Michael?
Yeah, I think that's where the interactive process comes into play, where you really have to have discussions to better understand what the expectations are. I think it's also important to look at the job descriptions to see what they are written like. That's such a rich area of opportunity to understand and define what's going on. I think you have to take into account what's transpired over the past 16 months as well. If somebody's been successful working from home for this period of time, and then they can't come back in, I think it draws a hard line to just say, well, you have to at this point. I think you have to have that dialogue going back and forth. And I feel that when you have that dialogue, you're beginning to build some trust with people, and then they see that you're working with them. And that to me goes a long way with perhaps diminishing any potential risk of litigation by having those ongoing discussions. And if a decision is made that it truly has to have somebody come back in the office, I think it needs to be clear, and it needs to be laid out why, and there needs to be a strong business case. Okay. But the empathy aspect of it has to be carried throughout the whole process.
Judy?
Some of the points with this are that, at this point, it was like 7.9 million low-wage workers left the workforce back in March, not of their own volition. And why? Because they needed to. New Jersey sick leave came along because we didn't want, quite honestly, servers in restaurants coming to work sick and sharing it with the 5 people that they are, 5 tables that they work. So, your hourly versus salary, yeah, there was a clear definer as to, yes, you could do your job from home, or no, you couldn't. I believe it's Google at this point is shutting down its buildings. They're letting everybody work from home because they can. It's a question of can you, and to Mike's point, if you have been successful in the last 16 months, your employer shouldn't rush to bring you back.
Right.
We are hearing that folks are going to wait until after the holidays, after Labor Day. Quite frankly, we're going to see this every holiday. You're going to see this odd break after Thanksgiving and an odd break after Christmas and odd break after Hanukkah. Why? Because that's when we gather. Right. And, is everybody going to be doing the right thing? Who knows? You could be doing all the right things and still get sick. So, the number of hourly to salaried, and then the disparity amongst, who those lower wage earners were. 58% of the workforce up until 2020 was women in the workforce. And suddenly there is this huge decline, millions of people leaving their jobs for obvious health and safety reasons, right? But predominantly women in positions, especially women of a variety of ethnicities, which unfortunately circles you right back to discrimination. And there's no way to get around it. All of these things are so intertwined right now as a result of the pandemic. And where are we going to come out of this?
Right. Now, I'm sorry, Michael, you wanted to add something?
No.
I'm sorry, David.
Well, I was just going to say that this segues very nicely with what Jennifer was saying before about how the issue of, people are going to say can't come back because of pre-existing condition, and then you're back into that HIPAA issue. And that's going to be the really tough one to dig yourself out of. So it really leaves the employer sort of between a rock and a hard place. Okay.
Now, you mentioned, Judy, the idea of the fact that women, the job losses fell pretty heavily on women. And it looks like everybody's going to go back to school in September. At least that's the plan the governor has set out. But there was an issue, there had been up until now, and I imagine it's still ongoing, about how you deal with childcare. And again, it's another division that's been created of people who can either afford childcare or can work at home and take care of their children, and those who cannot. Jennifer is again, I keep coming back to this. Well, what should you do then in that case? If someone is telling you, I can't come into work because my child is home because he or she can't go to school or can't go to camp or can't do something else.
Well, the protections for that have kind of run out, the mandated protections, but back to what Michael was saying about empathy and the interactive process, right? We're really looking for employers to, and I think employers work with their employees and be flexible and understand that maybe you're not going to bring everyone back full time Monday, right? It's going to be this buildup and be gradual, and you have to take different people's circumstances into account. But again, joy killer here, but the reverse issue becomes, I'm vaccinated and I'm paying for childcare, and I'd love to work from home and have my kid in the next room, and I'm being punished for doing the right thing. So maybe I should start following X religion or come up with some BS disability, so I can too stay home because I was productive at home and I'm not allowed to stay there. So that's when, again, the job description becomes so important. And I think a lot of companies and organizations may want to revamp or look again at their job descriptions and just decide, is this a position that can be done in a hybrid fashion, totally remotely, or are you required to be in the office? And if you are, just be able to articulate why that's necessary.
Okay. Well, that was going to be my question, was if you do that and you decide where you hadn't in the past that, yes, you must come, your job requires you to be in the office, and that was never the understanding, does that raise an issue then of fairness or does it raise any sort of legal objection?
Well, it depends who's being impacted, and there might be this disparate impact when you look at who's allowed to work from home and who isn't. And employees of color, perhaps, that while you're not singling them out, let's say it's women who are minorities who are in secretarial or administrative roles, and they really need to be in the office, but there's male executives who don't need to be in the office.
Right.
Now, it's not the intended effect, but there is discrimination that will have to be addressed.
Okay, and how do you address it?
Well,
anybody, I don't mean to make Jennifer the answer to all these questions. Michael and Judy, by all means, David, chime in if you have any ideas about how to get out of this, because I can almost hear some employers saying, this is too much for me. I can't deal with this. What am I going to do? I can't change every job description. I can't fire everybody. What am I going to do? And at this point, how do you begin to sort of cut that knot?
I think that Jennifer actually said it before when she first started speaking, and that is she was saying it's really important for human resource managers to sort of come to the forefront and come up with creative ways in which to deal with this. Be creative, and those lines now, those, I guess what used to be black and white lines, are sort of blurred a little bit. And what you can do is you can approach employees and you can say to an employee, well, we're going to be doing a bonus, but instead of a bonus, how do you feel about 1 day of work at home or something like that? And, not in lieu of a bonus, but maybe a reduced bonus. So there's a balancing act that's going to have to go on. And I think that HR is going to have to examine all the different ways in which they can be creative and to introduce this to their staff to be able to hold on to people, because people are going to say, if you're forced to come to the office, they're going to say, you know what, I'll just go find another employer. And then employers are going to be like throwing up their hands. Where are we going to find the employees? So,
and a lot of this has transitioned since last March. Last March, All the kids were out of school, but they still had to school. Okay, so teachers figured it out, parents figured it out. You know, the running joke is we all of a sudden all became homeschoolers. And that was not the case. It was a team effort. So we get through March to June, 3 million women walked away from their jobs in executive, admin, et cetera, positions, because it is immensely hard to have a full-time job and a child and have more than one child. And it's just exponentially more difficult. September, the kids go back. In New Jersey, we were very fortunate. You know, unfortunately, some did not get to go back to their physical buildings. Some were able to do a hybrid opportunity, and some were able to full-time go back. Again, all of the employers had to start to say, okay, so where is that line? Where do I need to be very mindful of the fairness factor? Because a woman can work from home because she has to care for her children, but we're making the man come in. Either direction can get you into trouble. As HR, the best thing you can do is just talk to your people. You know, be empathetic. The job I do for my clients, I could do it any time of the day, anywhere in the world. Our company, we have a building, we have an office, we all love to go to it. I miss my collegial friends from work. However, our organization took a hard line and said, we're a family organization. We care about all of our employees. What's going to be best for you? And everyone had the chance to weigh in. You know, it wasn't always going to be carte blanche. Where we're going to have to be really careful is this graduating class from college, their assumption's going to be, I can work from home.
Right.
I did my college degree from home. I'm doing everything from home.
Right.
Right? Jennifer, you laugh, you know.
Yep, I agree.
And so now where's your line? Because you can't say that every job that goes on in your facility or organization has to be in the building. Who needs to? People who have to physically do something at that location, right? You know, the hourly employee line. And that's where we've got to be really careful. There we'll end up right back with hourly versus salary and the disparate treatment that they'll get. It's a very broad conversation. And for every organization listening right now, you need to talk to legal counsel and your HR person and make your HR person just start to talk, because many are thinking about how do we make this? David brings up a good point. HR is a gray zone. How do I make it work for everybody in the building? How do I make it work for all of these people that we've trained, that we like to work with, that are a good team? How do I make it so that everybody still gets to be a part of that team and stay here? And they'll figure it out. I have all the hope in the world that it'll be figured out. I'm watching many of my clients go back to full-time work. And yeah, folks are hybrid. You know, one day they'll call me and they're in their living room, and the next day they'll call me and they're in the office.
So I'll share an anecdote. I mean, so in our organization, there are 3 guys, and of the 30 employees, the rest are all women. And that was very interesting because come pandemic, a lot of them have young families and they needed to be with the kids because the kids were off from school. So we made it work. Technologically, we dug in. We had to change a lot technologically to make it work for everyone. So that was a big change. But bottom line is we made it work. We gave people the flexibility that they needed. The team is still together. And now we have people slowly coming back to the office, and it worked out great. So, you know, we had to find, again, those lines were blurred a little bit. So from a personal perspective, and I know people like anecdotes, so that it ended up working out very well. So flexibility, I think, is the key.
It fascinates me that the kids who play Xbox and PlayStation and those things had better technological things than some of the businesses that I support in March 2020. And now they're up to snuff. But, you know, I kept thinking to myself, everybody needs to just take their kids' Xbox and use that in the office, because you can talk to everybody then.
Right.
Michael, you've been trying to jump in here. So
no, it's just really segues in really well to what David and Judy have been saying. But there are 2 pieces of information that from SHRM research that came out in the spring. One said that 27% of workers in the US think workplace equity is the most important issue they face at work. And the other was that 27% of female workers with caregiving responsibilities reported that their professional development was negatively affected by the pandemic, whereas only 10% of men reported the same. So it's, when we think of it as HRs being business partners, I think sometimes putting this stuff out in front of the C-suite and others in the organization and saying, listen, how is this impacting our organization? What do we need to do to think about it? Because as we started the discussion earlier about, you know, the Gen Z and people coming into the workplace, these are the types of things that they're giving consideration to as well. And they want to see how organizations are pivoting and augmenting as we move forward.
Okay. All right. I'd like to move into sort of a more practical area now, and that is, you know, how to head off problems before they start, and then how to deal with them as they come up. David, I imagine this all starts with the hiring process, and what are the issues that that employers need to keep in mind as they're doing that, as they're going through that, recruiting, interviewing, checking references, doing all of that.
Well, without obviously going into Jennifer's world, because probably a lot of the onboarding process is more along the lines of what Jennifer does. Mine is very specialized.
Mm-hmm.
And what we do is we assist employers with regard to the employment verification process, which is filling out the I-9 form, which is part of the onboarding process.
Okay.
But there's a lot of HR professionals are not familiar with the fact that there's this discrimination component that's subsumed within the employment eligibility verification process. So this I-9 form finds its genesis back in the Immigration Reform and Control Act, and it's one of the problems is that if a HR manager or HR professional tells an individual what documents to show, that is a form of discrimination called document abuse. And the U.S. Department of Justice, as they are on the lookout for discrimination on the basis of any other form of discrimination, they're also looking at individuals who are committing document abuse by telling individuals what documents to show in that process. So that's something that, you know, it's a little bit of a minefield. And there's a document called an M274, which is it's about 130-page document, I believe now, which explains how to fill out this 2-page I-9 form. So yeah, it's kind of ironic, but I think that it's important for the HR managers to know that that this is sort of out there and part of the process and a place where discrimination can occur. So
Okay.
there's that area of discrimination. Then there's also discrimination on the basis of citizenship and nationality, which is that you know, you have if an individual makes a determination about a person's nationality or citizenship, that also is actionable.
Okay.
So,
Now, I think we can probably all think of the kinds of questions and the kinds of actions that would be that would fall into that. What are you seeing? Are folks, and Jennifer, you can chime in here too. Are clients and people you deal with more savvy about that now? Because I always hear a horror story of can you believe that they asked that question, or can you believe that they did that? Do you run into that where just these egregious violations anymore? Or is it more sort of technical, not understanding the complexity of what they're supposed to be doing?
There's still those egregious violations.
Okay.
And you know what, it's not always, you'll hear this, but people say, I didn't mean that. I didn't mean anything by it. And where it comes up is in small talk, where you're trying to kind of gauge a candidate's personality and whether they'll fit into the organization. And so you're making small talk, right? And you might say something like, oh, I looked at your resume. I see you live in X town. My in-laws are parishioners at so-and-so church. Do you go there? That's not legal, but you didn't buy it. Oh, your ring is so nice and so shiny. Is it new? Or you have a tan? Were you on vacation? Oh, it's your honeymoon? You just got married? Oh, that's so exciting. Wait till the kids come. You know, things like that. And I love your accent. Where is it from?
What country in Asia are you from?
Right. You know, or
Or did they
Oh,
start
I-
guessing? Did he start trying to guess? I mean, that must be like horrible.
well, but so it's like you really run into trouble, and it's not this overt where you're looking at someone saying, gee, you know, you look like you're Muslim. Are you Muslim?
Mhm.
Not happening as much, but you're kind of opening this Pandora's box. So what I tell clients is to keep in the back of their heads, first, what's the job description? What are the skills you're looking for? And before you ask these questions, is the information that you're looking for, how does it tie into the position that you're hiring for? And if it doesn't, it's just to satisfy your own curiosity, or worse, don't ask it.
Okay, David, you
And
see
Jen,
similar.
I was going to say, well, I was going to say to Jennifer, and I'm willing to bet that she's doing this also as we are, is that do you have a script, a ramp up process where you work with the employers, the HR, and you sort of walk them through, the best practices in terms of onboarding? And we do the same with regard to, paperwork, I-9 employment verification, and we walk them through what they need to do, and so that it doesn't bleed into any other of the areas with onboarding, because the I-9 process is something that's very compartmentalized and should be handled, without the need to ask for more different documents, because
Okay.
that's the way we get into trouble.
Judy, Michael, what sort of issues do you see along these lines?
I
think
Michael.
still am seeing folks where it's a manager or a supervisor interviewing someone and HR is not there.
Ah,
And I find when HR is there, they can guide away from the small talk, wrong questions to kind of start with. And, the HR person is trained too. These are the skills we need. This is the certification we need. This is the education we need. And so they're going to stay focused, and they'll keep, hopefully, that conversation focused on the needs of the organization, and slying away from areas where it is small talk and it can get you into a lot of trouble.
right. Michael.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I think what I see sometimes is that the interviewer is sometimes as nervous as the interviewee because they've never been trained properly on how to conduct an interview.
Mhm.
And I think it's a great area of opportunity that organizations take the time to train, to do everything that Jennifer, David, and Judy have said, and get people prepared. It would be great if, as Judy said, an HR person could be there all the time for those interviews, but that may not always be the case. So I think the more they're trained and they're in that position to do it, there's going to have more of a comfort level. You go by the 80-20 rule. An interviewer should probably be listening 80% of the time, and the interviewee speaking that portion.
Okay. I can tell you just anecdotally, I've done dozens of job interviews. HR has never been with me and I have never received any training about how to do it. So I'm now thinking, oh my God, what was I doing?
Nervous. You're making me nervous.
Seemed okay at the time, but now I'm thinking, yee. Okay, let's. I just want to assure our viewers that I know we have questions. We are going to get to them. There's just a couple more things I want to talk about in the workplace. The first is about effective training programs. I think everybody here and everybody watching is probably familiar with the online courses where you go through a list, you're shown some scenarios, some of which are completely ridiculous, and then you have to answer a series of questions about them and then take a quiz at the end to make sure you understood it, and then you get a little certificate that you can print out and all of that. Is Judy and Michael and to the group, is that still the state of the art, or are there better ways to do this now? Is there a better way to engage people to really drive home the points that you all are talking about? Judy, start with you.
The best way is the human interaction.
Mhm.
I have been a trainer and a professor for 20 some odd years. And unless your comfort level is pushed at times, you're not going to hear what someone's saying. And you can get through those online learning experiences pretty quickly, and get to the certificate. They're not meant to challenge you. And when you bring people together and you're training them, you're building a team with that training, and you want that. You want them a team, you want them efficient, effective, and strong, working together. And you don't get that when they're doing an online scenario, a real life in the room scenario. Here's what you're going to ask. How do you respond? And everyone now, what were your thoughts on that? What would you have done differently? And you need to be able to drive the conversation and cultivate the relationships in that space at that point.
Okay.
I think that to what Judy said, that's true. And I think that's a great opportunity for HR as well. And I always caution that this should not be checkbox HR. It should not just be done to say that it's completed, but there's an opportunity to really hear what folks have to say. I can tell you when I do training, we'll do it with everybody, and then supervisors will stay and we'll do a deeper dive with them. In those discussions, it's just amazing how often people open up and share some of their concerns, not just about harassment and discrimination issues, but just about the challenges they're having as leaders as well. And I think it opens up the door. Oftentimes I walk away and I've got 3 or 4 other things to go back and speak to our client about, areas of opportunity just based on those discussions. I think in the situations where it has to be online because perhaps somebody's remote, they're working in a different state, what have you, those discussions should be followed up afterwards with their leader and perhaps another member of the team. I'd say even go out and give them a DoorDash gift card, let them buy lunch and get online and have a discussion about what they just did and ask them, so what was your takeaway? What was different here from what you've done in the past? What areas of opportunity do you see for us? And just kind of reinforce what it is. I think in new hires who are remote, that should be something that should be done in the first 3 business days. I think it's that critical to set culture.
Okay. Jennifer, did you want to add something? I mean, or go ahead, David. Yes.
No, I agree. Actually, so what we do is we offer, of course, in-person training. We offer online training. We also offer video. So we have it all there. But I believe, I agree with Judy and Michael. I think that there's no substitute for going and being there and talking. The hands-on is always the best. But then I think it has to be supplemented. It kind of goes to what I was saying before, is that it can't just be a one-shot thing. It has to be where you're repeating it a little bit. And we use the videos as a deeper dive because it also goes into the modules a little deeper than you would as a cursory overview. So once we've, let's say, dealt with the general issues involved in employment verification, then we would go into, how do you verify an individual who's coming with particular documentation? How would you do that? How would you handle an issue with a person who's, how do you deal with paperwork violations? How do you do a self-audit? So those are all modules that would be under that, that general overview that we would give.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how, what about the way the workplace looks? We talked a lot about that at the outset, about the new kinds of workers and the expectations that employees now have. And it's, I hate to go back to the online thing, but it's a favorite scenario of a younger person running up against, what he or she considers really Neanderthal attitudes of an older colleague. Is that getting worse, better? I mean, how is that shaking out? Judy and Michael, start with you.
Actually, I think the opportunity to share knowledge across generations can be very impactful. I think it's the way it's set up within the organization. I think the more it's introduced to people that, we're here to support one another and we can learn from each other, that really helps to take that perhaps that edge off of not wanting to do it. I think it's a great opportunity to step outside some of the stigmas that we hear or generalize that of communication skills. I've been around some folks, and I see this with what we do with the SHRM, with the Garden State Council in Jersey. We've got an emerging professionals group. These folks want to be connected with individuals who they can just talk about their career growth and opportunity. So I think it's there. I think it's really just unraveling it and giving people the opportunity to take advantage of it.
Okay.
I do think that the culture is built from top down. And if you look at, the current dynamic of managers in the workforce, you're going to have a lot of baby boomers. You're going to have a lot of Gen Xers. And there is a difference in how they communicate and how they work together. We do, and when I say we, I mean globally, many organizations do, here's a new hire, we're going to pair them with someone, and we're going to help them to become trained. We're missing the succession planning on the other end. We need to have those leadership folks who, you know, are ready to retire or ready to move on to the next best thing. They need to be training their replacement. And that's often gonna be someone coming in fresh, new, interested. You know, not everybody is interested in hearing the training that you want, that you need to give them. Sometimes it's going to require meeting them where that person's at and getting them to that next level. You can't bring someone up to you if you haven't explained to them what the up is going to look like. You know, I see college kids, and their natural assumption is they're going to graduate from college and get a $70,000 a year job. And then I say to them, if you look at the jobs that you would apply for right now, they're asking for 2 years experience and it's an entry-level job. And they look at me like I'm crazy. And I say to them, you need mentors. You need to find somebody where you want to work and ask them to be a mentor. Have them talk to you about what's the job like, what's the place like. You know, learn all the good and all the bad before you go, yes, I'm putting all of my eggs in this basket. You know, the Gen Xers were the generation who all had jobs and then were like, this is not what I wanted to do with my life. What am I doing? We don't want the next two to get that. And we need to train people. You never get a promotion to a new job that as an HR person, I would say, okay, go ahead, you're good. No, you get a promotion. We need to train you. Mike needs to come in. He's going to work with you on supervising your team and building your team and getting those pieces together, because when someone moves out and a new person moves in, you don't want a blip in the lifeline. Mm-hmm. You needed to stay consistent. And a lot of times a good manager leaves and they take all that institutional knowledge with them, and you have a problem.
Okay. All right. Again, another thing we talked about earlier was remote work, and does not having folks in the office complicate this process of training and holding people accountable? Is it okay to do these kinds of things over Zoom? I mean, if you can't have that in what Michael was talking about, that in person, that personal contact. David, you have some experience with it. What does it look like from your perspective?
Well, I was going to say, I hope that Zoom works. Otherwise, it defeats the purpose of what we're doing today.
Right. Exactly.
So, but no, we've offered our training by Zoom. We did not have any blips at all in what we were doing. Again, we offer the training throughout the country, so oftentimes doing it remote is required. And you know, having several individuals on at various sites has worked out really well. They haven't had to travel, so you know, it's worked just fine. I mean, thank goodness for the technology. But I think it's super important that you have to embrace the technology and also train yourself on how to use it. We are pretty PowerPoint heavy, you know, and we're also trying to create a hands-on, even though it's Zoom. So we try to make it as interactive as possible, but so far so good. Okay. So yeah, so I only have good things to say about the way that technology has worked for us.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Unless anybody else wants to chime in on that, we're getting near the top of the hour, and we'll start to take some questions. One last thing before we do, though, I'd like to hear from all of you, just sort of a general idea of this notion of creating a workplace that fosters equality and that promotes diversity and inclusion. Do you know of things, for example, specific programs that work, or is it really just sort of attitudinal and training and getting people all on the same page? Let's start with Jennifer. I mean, what's the best approach to that holistic idea of our workplace really is fair and really does promote diversity and inclusion, and everybody feels that way? How do you get to that point?
Well, that's the $64,000 question. There's not going to be a one size fits all. There isn't. I don't think. It's really going to depend on your organization and the culture. And you know, not everyone. I don't know who pointed out before, but not everyone is Google, where you can have a DEI officer, although I believe he had some trouble, the one that they had in place, he had some tweeting issues, but not every organization has the capacity to fill all these positions. So it's going to be kind of a work in progress. And I think in terms of leadership, being open to that and not just dismissing it, because what Judy and Michael are talking about with succession planning, it's hard, right? It's a lot of kind of thankless work in terms of the short-term reward, because you've got very busy people who have to take more time out that they really didn't have to encourage and coach and guide the next generation of employees. And it's hard to force yourself to take that time. And the same thing goes with the diversity and inclusion. It's much easier to say, okay, we'll do the training and everyone sign off on it. It's really going to be this gradual work in progress. You want to, I think, talk about and educate your management and supervisors about intent versus impact and the difference between those. And just because something isn't your experience, right, that you can't relate to it and it's not your perspective, it doesn't diminish someone else's feelings about it and the validity of their feelings. So it's really just kind of opening yourself up to other views and realizing that just because it's not your experience, it doesn't mean that it's not someone else's.
Okay. And Michael and Judy, along those lines, do you see companies, employers who appoint a D&I officer and say, okay, I've done that, and that now it's all that person's job, and no one else has to worry about it? I mean, do you run into that sort of dynamic?
I think it's really some organizations at the size that we have don't have the ability to hire somebody like that. So it becomes a collaborative effort where, and this I think is where you can take your organization and really build. You take people across the organization and you put a culture team together or what have you, diversity, equity, and inclusion team, and you give them the opportunity to come back with ideas and what have you, and perhaps plan events on a monthly or quarterly basis. And I think by doing that with that diverse group, you're in a better spot to be more inclusive, and you're in a better spot for people to feel like there's some momentum going because their voice is being heard.
Okay. Judy?
Yeah, I think the majority of organizations, if they've hired a diversity and inclusion person, that's great. I don't see a lot having the bandwidth to do that, especially right now.
Okay.
I do see, though, that organizations who focus on their culture do better because they recognize the differences. We were talking about all these different types of discrimination and diversity. There is right off the bat departmental discrimination. This team gets to do this, and this team has the prime hours, and this team is completely off site because of what they do. And so it's a question of each of those managers then working together so that there's a level of equity that everybody sees and understands.
Okay.
It's not going to be the same for everyone. My opinion of the workday is going to be totally different than all of you. And so it's that we need to work together on this and bringing people together to have the tough conversations.
Okay. David, it sounds like your organization has been doing this. Is that, am I right in that impression? And if so, how'd you get there?
Well, first of all, we have a very eclectic staff. I mean, our staff is basically from everywhere in the world. We do international dinners. That's one of the ways to get things going, and everyone starts talking, and we all chat about where are you from, and so cultural diversity is something that we embrace. Interesting story about our diversity director is that I had an individual in the organization who was saying things that were totally inappropriate. He was saying things about certain cultures and being derogatory. So I pulled him into my office. I sat him down and I said, guess what? You're our new diversity director. So you'll be reporting to us on a weekly basis about the things that we can do to further embrace diversity and inclusion. And that taught him a great lesson. You know, he was a younger employee, but I think he got the point. And so he was productive and reported to me directly. So I made it, you know, so that was before he was not reporting, you know, higher up. So now he was reporting directly to me. And so I think that that was a good move on our part.
Okay.
But, you know, at the end of the day, I mean, it's about, you know, getting rid of these unconscious biases and, you know, being able to promote true diversity and inclusion throughout the organization. And for me, it was really, you know, I grew up in Teaneck, which is I don't know if most people know this, it's the first city in the country to voluntarily desegregate. So we never thought anything of diversity and inclusion because it was just all there. You know, so actually it's kind of interesting. And I think this goes back to the very beginning of what you were saying, is that this environment has brought diversity and inclusion because of the Trump bump in the last 4 years. Diversity and inclusion then comes to the forefront. So, you know, for some of us, we just never even gave it a second thought. It was just a normal way of doing things. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, as promised, we will look at what our audience is on their mind. Okay, what about HIPAA issues? How to verify employee vaccination? Now, we touched on this a little bit, but I guess for the lawyers here, what are the issues that employers should be concerned about when you're trying to verify if someone is? They show you their COVID card. Can you match it with an ID? I mean, check check it for genuineness. I mean, what do you do at that point?
You know, more and more employers are being asked to take on more of almost a police role here. And at a certain, I think unless somebody shows you a clearly illegitimate card with, you know, where it's handwritten or it's so clear that it doesn't pass the smell test, you have to kind of accept it, right? If somebody's coming to you and saying, here's my vaccination card. And what you have to do also is, before doing that, communicate what who's going to ask for the card. Is a copy going to be made? Where's the copy going to be kept? Who's going to have access to this information? This is all detail that an organization needs to work out ahead of time. And again, you have to be ready for the possibility that someone will come to you and say, I'm not vaccinated because, and now you know the because. And if more needs to be done due to the because, like an accommodation or something else, then it's on you to engage in the interactive process. So what I've been telling clients is, if you're going to lift mask and social distancing requirements for vaccinated employees, put it out there in an email. Say you have to show proof of vaccination to whoever, the HR person, and only proof of vaccination. Please do not give any additional information as it's not being sought.
Okay.
You know, not everyone will abide, but at least you're putting it out there.
Okay. And David, does this add a level of complexity to your work when you're doing employee verification? You now have to be worried about vaccination, or is it something that you don't?
I think again, it's a separate and compartmentalized analysis, but I think that the analogy here would be that if you're taking a look at a card, I mean, the I-9 rules are that you should look at a person's employment verification documents, and they have to be genuine on their face and refer or relate to the individual showing them. So I think that those are probably those are good tests as to whether or not, I mean, I don't think I've seen anything out there at this point in time which deals with, is it a true document, you know? But the test of genuine on its face and referring or related to the individual is a subjective and an objective methodology. So I think that, you know, arming an HR with making that determination is not unreasonable.
Okay. Michael and Judy, I didn't mean to exclude you from this. Do you have anything that you wanted to add to the HIPAA question and verification? If not, we'll move on. We got a lot of questions about vaccines, not surprisingly. So if people choose not to vaccinate and you've established guidelines for interaction among your staff, doesn't their choice dictate their agreement to follow the guidelines, even when that includes ostracizing? So they're making their choice. They're saying, okay, you already said we had to do this. I'm not gonna. Now what? Anyone? Judy, you're nodding. So let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, to be very honest, if they're choosing not to follow the guidelines, and yes, they've made their choice, it's still going to come down to how are others treating them. So, we have to be mindful of, I choose not to be vaccinated, but I'm going to go into the office, determining your guidelines, it may be no common areas, whatever that case may be. And then knowing that I am officially leaving myself out of probably a variety of activities that my counterparts are going to be involved in. And that could be meetings, like things that you don't want to be left out of.
Okay, Jennifer, I'm sorry, you were about to start to answer. So
Yeah, I mean, I agree that people are making that choice, and they will be left out of things. But what I've been doing is when I'm drafting policies or communications where we're saying, if you're not vaccinated, you must continue to follow social distancing and masking guidelines. We're also putting language in, just reminding people that people may wear masks even if they are vaccinated. And you should not question anyone else's decisions. Everyone has to support their colleagues, and it's not up for discussion why someone is masked or why someone's chosen not to vaccinate. And again, the people are making this choice, but it's not going to stop anyone from filing a lawsuit or making a complaint, unfortunately.
Okay. All right. Now, the issue I think also arises, at least I've seen some discussion of this in the remote work context, where you're given a choice of coming into the office or working remotely. You choose to work remotely. You're absenting yourself from the life of the office. You make that choice. I mean, if you're passed over for promotion, that's just tough luck. Or is there something that employers need to do to make sure that those folks are included and evaluated fairly going forward? Michael?
I think you have to come back to what the job description is and the essential duties of the role, and the ability of the person to perform them remotely or in person. And there may be a point where they have to come in person, but I would say if they were up for a promotion in the foreseeable future, you could have that discussion, but also plant the seed that at some point down the road, we probably would be looking for you to spend more time in the office as well, and have that discussion during that process. It's almost like a little bit of that interactive process to get their feel for it and understanding what the expectations are going to be.
Okay. Jennifer, you're nodding. That's the approach.
Yeah, I agree. And you have to just communicate that, because you're giving an employee the option of working remotely and then passing that employee over for promotion because they're not in the office and there's no FaceTime happening, but that wasn't communicated to them, then that's going to be an issue.
Okay. So we go back to that again, communication, making sure everything is clear out front. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Our employees have to be on site to perform their work, and some are not willing to get the vaccine. What is the path forward here? I think the assumption here, the underlying question is that the employer wants everybody to be vaccinated. I think that would be a safe assumption. What is the path forward there? We want you to be vaccinated. I'm not gonna. Now what do you do? And you have to come in. You can't be out. You can't work remotely. You have to be here. We want you to be vaccinated. What do you do if someone says, Judy, any thoughts?
Well, the EEOC mandated that you can make that a mandate of employment. Now, do you relieve them of their duties? Do you lay them off? Like I'm sure there's 50 different decisions to be made on how am I going to manage this employee or this situation, because it's not just one employee, everyone is watching. In HR, it's do for one, do for all, because they're all going to ask about it next. So, is their objection to being vaccinated a legitimate reason and you have to accommodate them? Would be one of the first questions.
Okay.
And then if not, call legal counsel, because we don't even know, and this has not been fully tested yet to see where you're going to end up with.
Okay. And Jennifer, okay, they call legal counsel. What do you tell them?
You have to, what Judy said first, why are they not willing to be vaccinated?
Okay.
The case of, I don't believe in it, it hasn't been tested, I think Bill Gates is watching me, then that's a different case from a valid religious objection or an underlying disability. And if you're going to mandate that your staff be vaccinated and everyone must be there, maybe it's a plant or some other sort of factory environment, then at a certain point, if you cannot accommodate these people, and if you're not obligated to accommodate them, then it's okay to let them go. But you're going to want to definitely talk to counsel, and you're going to want to look at the job description and document everything along the way, so you can show why it's just not feasible to accommodate.
Okay. And yet more on vaccinations. Can we as a private company not allow outside members who are not vaccinated to not be accepted at the office? I guess that means visitors, probably vendors, job candidates, maybe. Can you exclude members, maybe even customers? I mean, if you're a store and you don't want to include, I mean, I guess that one's pretty much settled, except in states where they've made that illegal. Can a company, a private company, say, no, even if you have business with us, you're not vaccinated, you can't come in here?
Yes, they can.
Okay.
A company policy is there to protect its employees. And so, with schools, again, they had a cohort. That group of kids is that group of kids. You didn't mix the cohorts because, a child from cohort A could be sick. Well, now you're only dealing with that cohort being sick. In your business, you have a front desk person. You may have someone at the door. You could have someone where people are coming into contact with that individual. You know nothing about them.
Right.
I foresee 95% of all interviews coming soon will all be, the first one will be virtual. We won't do a phone interview anymore. It'll be a virtual interview.
Okay.
And, then you start to get into the next steps. But your job as the employer is to protect your staff first. And if that means limiting the people, then you limit the people.
Okay. And when you have hired someone who is African American and they bring up things about their look, is it okay to ask questions about it? Or then what if you compliment them that they look nice? I guess that the assumption is the door has been opened. Are you then allowed to sort of walk through it, and how far are you allowed to go, Jennifer?
Be very, very, very careful. I can give a real life example that if I didn't know it was real, I wouldn't have believed it. But right after George Floyd died and the protest started, I had an HR employee who sent a meme to 3 coworkers, one of whom was her subordinate and was African American, and the other 2 were Hispanic. And the woman who sent the meme out was Asian, so very diverse crew, collegial crew. It was a picture of 2 African American men engaged in a sex act up against a police car. And there was sort of a chyron at the bottom to make it look like it was from a newscast that said, Minneapolis protests continue. And that was it, just the picture. Unclear on what planet this would ever be appropriate or even worth sending to anyone. But that aside, I did an investigation, and it really opened Pandora's box in the HR department. And what the person who sent the picture out was saying was, we talk about this stuff all the time. It's not like there wasn't a history there. I just to start a conversation. Unclear what conversation that was going to be, but when I spoke to, interviewed the recipients, not surprising, the African American woman felt very differently about receiving the meme than the 2 Hispanic women did. And she said that, yeah, they had these discussions. The African American woman said, we'd had these discussions before, but she's so ignorant, my supervisor. She would ask me things about the cuisine, why my father was never around, why so many African American men leave their families, so many inappropriate questions and conversations. And just because she didn't object, this is her supervisor asking her these questions. So she engaged in the conversation, she said, you know, I felt like it was an opportunity to educate, but I wasn't comfortable. And so you have to be very careful, because just because somebody's not going to stop you and say, hey, you're making me uncomfortable, doesn't mean you're not making them uncomfortable.
Right. Okay. Michael, it seems to me that this goes back to your point about doing things in person. It seems like you might be able to head this sort of thing off if you can have that kind of exchange rather than just a sort of an unchanging scenario online. If I don't want to sound crass here, but if people can sort of test it out, test the waters a little bit, how far can we go? What are we allowed to say? What are we allowed to do? That might go a long way toward alleviating some of these things, or heading them off anyway. Yeah, I know I'm not supposed to do that. I'm not supposed to go that far.
Yes, I think back to the original, the question that was posed, I would shift that discussion right back to the job interview. I may acknowledge and say, thank you for sharing, but I'm going to shift it right back to what needs to be, what we're focusing on.
Okay.
And I think that comes down to the type of training that can be done as well. Those types of scenarios should be discussed in training on how do we handle that and how do we move through it. And one of the questions I'm constantly asking when I'm having discussions with people, for me, is what questions haven't I asked that I should be asking right now? Because that helps me grow, because I may think I have it covered from all different angles, but sometimes other people who you're prepping with can point something out and help you develop a skill for that situation as well.
Okay. We are going to give you all a chance to wrap up in a few minutes, but one last thing I wanted to ask about, because there are a couple of concepts that sort of come back throughout the discussion. One is the whole question of empathy, and the other, although we haven't really said it, is flexibility. And I'm wondering if you know, empathy seems to me must require flexibility. David, it sounds like your organization, your shop, is very flexible. Do you feel as though that's a necessary component to being empathetic and running an organization that seems to get along as well as yours does?
Well, I think that flexibility is the key to, you know, top management. I think that you have to be willing to move in any direction. Obviously, you want to do it with as much thought process and as much input as possible from trainers, from legal counsel. You know, that's what it's all about. But your, you know, ability to move relatively quickly, especially depending upon what the needs are, you know, of the organization, key to top management.
Right. Okay.
Absolutely.
And, Michael, I think you were the first one to sort of bring up the whole idea of empathy. Did my characterization make sense? that empathy is, maybe it's not another word for like flexibility or the other way around, but that they go hand in hand and they have to coexist together.
I agree. I think it's important to look at that and learn and grow. I think the other thing too, the empathetic piece of it, it's one of the core competencies that are looked at in leaderships roles moving forward. But it's also to set that expectation that, you know, we're going to make decisions and we're going to go from here. We may not make the right decision. We're going to fail fast and we're going to pivot and be flexible and change from there and go forward. I think sometimes when you set that expectations that we understand we're allowing ourselves to be vulnerable here and that we're going to take some well thought out risks in what we're doing, but we're going to learn from it. And I think it's important to put that out there. I think that's another way that you build trust with your workforce.
Okay. All right. We are near the end of our time, but I did want to ask each of you to sort of give us some final thoughts about either a key takeaway that you have, or maybe we've missed something, an important concept that you want to bring out, or just simply reiterate a concept that you felt we kind of glossed over. So let's start with Jennifer, since we go alphabetically these days.
One point that I just wanted to bring up that I didn't before about the in-person training versus online, it really depends on what your end goal is. If you're just looking to check the box and say, yeah, we did it, then I think online's fine. But if you're trying to have a more meaningful conversation and more of an interactive conversation with your staff and employees, I think that in-person is really important. And every single time that I've done an in-person training, I get questions later. where somebody comes back alone and says, hey, can I just quickly ask you one thing? And they weren't comfortable asking in front of the group. So sometimes they don't want management hearing their question either. So I think that that's really, really important. And that can be done on Zoom as well. You know, you can set up a sort of side appointment with somebody. But overall, I think that what you said with the empathy and the flexibility is the name of the game moving forward, and just trying to figure out how do we retain our workforce and build on it and continue to progress in the way that we need to while still running a business and making it profitable, but also really building a team for the future.
Okay. David?
I think at least in our world, this is the immigration landscape. You know, when the Biden-Harris administration stepped in, they made some great strides. One of them, of course, was the immediate elimination of the Muslim ban. And I think one thing that sort of flew under the radar, which was really important, was that he passed an executive order stating that there will never be any more laws passed which discriminate on the basis of religion. So it was really nice that he just kind of set the pace and obviously brings diversity and inclusion just right up to the forefront. And even more so, what was interesting is that there was, and this also was sort of kind of hidden, you know, in the first few days of the administration, was that they moved to change the use of the word alien to a non-citizen foreign national. So just by doing a couple of changes like that, what it is philosophically, it changes the whole landscape and has people thinking about, you know, the way we're using words, the way we're referring to people, the way we're making assumptions about people. And it seems like through the regulations, through the executive orders, there's a step in the right direction to eliminate unconscious bias. So, you know, my humble opinion is that, you know, it's great that we've taken that direction, at least for the time being. And I think it's my hope that we persist in just making sure that this stays at the forefront and we don't forget, you know, the importance of this issue.
Okay. Judy, final thoughts?
Every opportunity there is to make sure that your population or your workforce models the demographics of where you are is critical. You know, millennials are not new to this, and people keep thinking that, you know, it's Gen Z. They've been in the workforce 5 years at minimum. So we've got to recognize and not pinpoint its generational issues. There are differences in the generations, yes, absolutely. But even, you know, relating to our panel, we all call from a different walk of life. We all come from a different organization. We've got lots of differences amongst us. We could have had 100 people on here and might not have still reached every single demographic that we would want to reach. Biggest key in business is still people buy and work with people that look like them. If you want to find success in the economic business, you've got to then represent every ethnicity or diversity that is out there.
And Michael, you get the final word.
Yeah, I think one of the things that wasn't mentioned, but it's an overriding theme, is emotional intelligence with everything that we're talking about here. The self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management skills that are so critical as we move forward. I think of Stephen Covey's circle of influence versus circle of concern. And we, as an organization, most people spend 40 hours a week, which is roughly about 25% of our lives working. So when we look at organizations and we talk about our circle of influence, we have that ability to really make some changes here and keep us moving forward in the right direction. And I think that's going to come down to with us all getting comfortable with the uncomfortable and realizing that that's the now norm, and it's going to be the norm moving forward, that we have to remain comfortable with the uncomfortable so we can keep stretching and growing. This is a journey. It's not a destination that we're achieving. It's an ongoing journey.
Okay. And I apologize for transposing David and Jennifer's place in the alphabet. I obviously have to work on my ABCs, so I realize I made that mistake. Thank you, David Nachman, Jennifer O'Connor, Judy Saylor, Michael Timmis. As always, we'll have live coverage of today's event later on njbiz.com and expanded coverage in our next print edition, which is dated July 12th. And remember to look for the recording email, the link in the email. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay safe, everyone.